Okay, this is going to be a video, an audio version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the next three chapters, starting with chapters 4, 5, and 6. And again, I'm going to quickly give you an introduction to the summary of the chapter, and then I'm going to follow it up with an analysis of each chapter. So, beginning with chapter 4, 1 year has passed since Jekyll has told Utterson that he could be rid of Hyde whenever he wanted. So we have this full year. We don't really know what's going on this year, during this year, but we do find out that whatever is going on with Hyde, it's continued. His sinful nature, that evil within him and his evil actions has continued. And it's in this chapter that we begin to see that it's even gotten worse. So we open up to this maid who is recounting the story of something that she viewed from her window in the middle of the evening as she was sitting out, romantically looking out the window, and she sees this beautiful gentleman, this aged and beautiful man with white hair, and he's walking down the street, and coming from a different direction is Hyde. She recognizes Hyde. Hyde has had some kind of dealings with her boss, and so she knows who Hyde is. And the two come together right underneath her window. And the maid begins to tell the story of the murder of Carew. She compares Carew, an aged and beautiful man with white hair, to Hyde, who she immediately has this dislike from her interaction with him with her boss. And so again, there is another example of a duality, the nature of Carew compared to Hyde, that you could use within your essay that you're writing. She describes Hyde as having this ape-like fury as he begins to murder Carew. Carew is seen as this kind gentleman. She can tell from his body language, even though she can't hear the words that he's saying to Hyde, she can tell from his body language that it seems as if he's just asking for directions and he's being very kind. And Hyde just completely goes off with him and begins to beat him, just horribly beat him with his cane. And it's this thick, solid wood cane. He beats him so hard that she can hear Carew's bones breaking. He beats him so hard that it actually even breaks that cane. And so she begins to describe this, and it's absolutely horrible. She faints. 2 hours later, she calls the police, and the inspector comes, and nothing can be found on, well, actually everything can be found on Carew, but the inspector did find a letter in the pocket of Carew, and the letter is addressed to Utterson, and so that's how Utterson is pulled into the story. The next morning, the police go to Utterson. They take him the letter that was on Carew. They tell him that Carew was murdered, and it's suspected that Hyde was the one that killed him. And so so Utterson then recognizes the cane, the broken part of the cane that recognizes the broken part of the cane that the police have. Hyde has left part of the broken cane at the scene, and so he recognizes it, and he notices that it's one that he gave to Jekyll not too long ago, a few years ago. And so he then decides that he is going to lead the police to Hyde's residence. And this is the residence in Soho, not the one, the side door that enters to Jekyll's lab. So once they end up at the Hyde's residence in Soho, the police then discover the other part of the broken cane, and so it definitely links him to the crime scene. And then they also notice in the fireplace that there are some ashes, some remnants of things that obviously Hyde tried to burn. And one thing they're able to pull from that fire is a partially burned checkbook, and it's Hyde's checkbook. And so the police are so excited. They think that Hyde is definitely going to need money, so they go and they wait for him at the bank, and of course, he never shows. The analysis of this one chapter is that a year has passed, like I started off with these notes. We don't know what Hyde is doing or has been doing, but we can assume that he has continued his evil deeds. And so from the crime that he committed in the first chapter where he tramples the girl to this absolutely heinous crime, we can assume that he didn't just jump from that mellow kind of trampling to something so big without having done crimes in between. And so his capacity for evil has increased. A good thing within this story is that Stevenson, the author, provides a full moon as a part of the setting on this night that Hyde kills Carew. And he does this for two reasons. The first one is to enable the maid to see exactly what happens so that she can recount it. But another one is to reinforce his theme of that supernatural versus the rational. And so, kind of this underlying thought is that evil beings tend to commit heinous crimes during a full moon. And that was very common in stories of those days. You have the werewolf that would come out during a full moon, a deformed men would come out, vampires, all of those different things are linked to that full moon idea. And so it makes it easy to see why Hyde commits this heinous crime, supernatural, underneath the setting of a full moon. We also see that Carew is presented as a man with this innocent and this old world kindness of disposition, and he is the complete opposite, the antithesis to Hyde, who represents pure evil. So it's no wonder that Hyde finds offense with the goodness of Carew, because he's the exact opposite of himself. Hyde is not content to simply murder the distinguished man, but he has to completely destroy him. And the reason for that is because the goodness in Carew brought out the most intense evil in Hyde. In order to allow Utterson to continue reporting the story, remember we're getting this story in third person from Utterson's viewpoint, and so in order for Utterson to kind of know what's going on, Stevenson brings him into the picture through the letter that's found on Carew's body. And so Utterson takes the inspector to Hyde's Soho address, and he doesn't take him to Jekyll's house because he's still protecting Jekyll's reputation. And again, that theme of reputation continues to pop up. The inspector wants to get out a description of Hyde, but of course, those few people who have seen him all have differing descriptions of him. It's because it's the evilness within him that makes him appear so deformed, and each one of them sees that evilness a little bit differently. And obviously there's no photo that exists. So it's almost as if Hyde himself does not exist. Going into the next chapter, the incident of the letter, Utterson immediately, after leaving Soho, he immediately goes to Jekyll's house, and he confronts Jekyll, who claims that he has heard of the story. He's heard of all the newspaper people, the kids that are out on the streets, crying out the story of this news. And Jekyll lets Utterson know that he is never ever going to see Hyde again. Jekyll is just like in shock. He looks ill, he looks deathly, and so he says that he is never going to have anything to do with Hyde again. Jekyll then gives Utterson a note that he received from Hyde, where Hyde says that he is safe, he has a way to escape, and therefore Jekyll is just kind of out in the clear. We don't have to worry about Jekyll and Hyde connecting again. Utterson asks Jekyll at this point if Hyde forced him to write the will, and Jekyll nods his head after he has this kind of funny look on his face. He nods his head, yes, that it was Hyde that forced him to write the circumstances of his will. If you remember, the will said if Jekyll dies or if he disappears. Utterson then, as he's leaving, he asks Poole, Who delivered the letter? Jekyll, remember, says that actually Utterson asked Jekyll if he still has the envelope from where the letter was delivered, and Jekyll says that he burned it, and so Utterson then, as he's leaving, talks to the butler, and he is asking the butler, "Did you see who it was that delivered it?" And the butler, Poole, says that no one came by at all to deliver this letter. And this frightens Utterson because Utterson then kind of insinuates or surmises that Hyde must have gone through that side door, that laboratory door. Utterson then discusses the situation with his good friend Mr. Guest. Mr. Guest knows all kinds of things that are going on. He's a very good friend of Utterson's, and Utterson hires him to do some of his lawyer-like work. And so he shares this situation with Mr. Guest. And then Guest then asks to look at Hyde's letter, and at the same time, an invitation from Jekyll is delivered, inviting Utterson to dinner. And so Guest takes the invitation with Jekyll's handwriting on it, and he compares it to the letter that Hyde wrote, and he comments that the handwriting is very, very similar, except for the slant is a little bit different. And so this kind of again frightens Utterson. He decides that he is going to lock that note up, that letter, into his safe. And the thing that frightens him is that he believes that it's been forged by Jekyll to cover up the murder. The analysis of this chapter is that when Utterson goes to Jekyll's house, this is the first time he's actually admitted into the laboratory. And he sees how run down it is. He sees how the windows have this dark, eerie cast upon them, and so he kind of suggests that dirty side again is directly linked to Hyde. When Utterson sees Jekyll for the first time, and again it's in this little area of the laboratory, he notices that Jekyll looks deadly sick and that his voice has changed. And Jekyll's sickness is a symbolic representation of his sick conscience, because he's so shocked by what Hyde did, and he feels somewhat responsible for it. Utterson then leaves Jekyll, wondering if Jekyll is hiding Hyde. So here's the spoiler alert for some of you who do not know how the story ends. You might want to wait and come back to this, or you're about to find out as you read the next section anyways. So here's a quick spoiler alert. Stevenson is using the pun Hyde, how Jekyll is hiding Hyde, because the real reason that Jekyll created Hyde was so that he, Jekyll, could hide his own sinful actions behind the character of Hyde in order to live his respectable life as Dr. Jekyll. And so that theme of reputation even surfaces through the creation of Hyde. The fear of losing his good reputation makes Jekyll resolve to be done with Hyde completely, but later we find out within the next couple of chapters that Hyde has so much of a grasp on Jekyll, on his heart, and on his desire for that evil side of himself, that he cannot be rid of Hyde, even though he thinks that he can. So next chapter, Hyde has vanished. Hyde has committed this heinous crime, and he has vanished. No one can find him. The inspectors can't find him. No one sees him. And it's immediately after that that Jekyll's good health returns. He looks better. He returns to doing things in public. He's hosting dinner parties. He just seems like his old self. And this goes on for about 2 months. Utterson really gets to see Jekyll almost on a daily basis. He's going over to Jekyll's house. He's excited by the fact that Jekyll has returned to normal, and he's hoping that they are completely done with Hyde. However, beginning January 12th, as he begins to go over to Jekyll's again and again, the butler Poole turns Utterson away. Jekyll refuses to see Utterson, and this kind of makes Utterson a little bit nervous. So Utterson goes to see Dr. Lanyon, and he's shocked to find that Dr. Lanyon is terribly ill and that he is pretty much on his deathbed. And Lanyon reveals to Utterson that the illness that he has, he recognizes it, he knows he's about to die, and he admits that it's because he had this shock. And so Utterson learns that the shock is somehow related to Jekyll, whom Lanyon now wants absolutely nothing ever to do with him again. It's as if Jekyll is dead to Utterson. So Utterson, wanting to try to heal that friendship between Lanyon and Jekyll, writes a letter to Jekyll, and Jekyll responds in another letter, and his response mirrors exactly Lanyon's. Jekyll does not want to have anything to do with Lanyon either, and so they have split their friendship. It's completely over, and they are moving on. Jekyll also informs Utterson that from now on he intends to lead a very secluded life, and he asks for absolute privacy and solitude. And this just freaks Utterson out because with Hyde being gone, Jekyll just seemed so good and everything seemed well when he was back to his normal self, and then all of a sudden it's completely flipped and he's reverted back. Within 3 weeks from this, Lanyon is dead, and he has left a letter for Utterson with strict instructions that it is not to be opened until Jekyll's death or until Jekyll disappears. I forgot to put that in the notes, that it's until Jekyll dies or Jekyll disappears. And so that again frightens Utterson because it mimics the same wording that was on Jekyll's will. Okay, so we have the analysis of this chapter, and it's symbolic that once Jekyll rids his life of Hyde, Jekyll completely changes. It's as if he has purged himself of some deep disease that was eating away at him, and with that purging, he returns to this healthy lifestyle. And so then it becomes puzzling when Jekyll all of a sudden reverts back to that old secretive self, and we're going to find out why he does that in chapter 10. Dr. Lanyon's illness, which is explained in chapter 9, is a result from his disapproval of Jekyll's ideas, of Jekyll's experiments. We don't know at this point what those are. Again, we're going to find out in chapter 9. And so what Lanyon learns about that Jekyll's experiments is that he learns that the evil lies within all of men, and this is what really puts him on death's bed. Lanyon is exposed to evil incarnate, and then through that he realizes that every person is partly evil, and therefore this is what shocks him and leads to his death. Utterson is tested after Lanyon dies. He is tested when he receives an envelope which says not to be opened until the death or disappearance of Dr. Henry Jekyll, which is worded just like Jekyll's will. Utterson fears for the life of Jekyll, and he considers opening the envelope anyway, but because of his professional faith and honor to his dear friend, he restrains himself from opening it, even though he really wants to. However, he's lost Lanyon, and so he doesn't want to lose Jekyll as well. And so that ends this section, and we're about to get to the end of the story where everything is revealed.